When you look at a map of the United States, you typically just see interstate, highways, state lines, maybe some topography if you're looking at a physical map.
Right. Usually feels very static.
Yeah, it feels permanent. But reading through the data for today's deep dive, I had this incredibly visceral reaction. I mean, it didn't feel like I was looking at a map of a country at all.
What did it feel like to you?
It felt like I was staring at a general's battlefield map right in the middle of a massive multi-front war. Only, the enemy isn't an army, it's the elements.
That is a very precise way to look at data. It truly is a map of a country under siege by its own landscape.
And we have the situational report right in front of us. Today, we are looking at the August 10th, 2026 Daily Tech Reader Wildfire Report,
which aggregates data directly from the National Interagency Fire Center, the National Interagency Coordination Center, and the National Weather Service.
Exactly. And the mission for you, the listener, is to understand the true scale, the geographic anomalies, and the complex atmospheric mechanics of what is actually burning right now. Okay, let's unpack this.
Because the baseline number here is just staggering.
It really is. The U.S. is currently sitting at preparedness level 5. The raw statistics alone are hard to wrap your head around. I mean, we're talking 94 uncontained large fires burning across the country, and there are 30,419 personnel deployed.
And that deployment includes 645 crews, 1,870 engines, and 226 helicopters. It is a logistical mobilization on par with a major military operation.
Yeah, and NSC reports that 3,629,723 acres have burned on large fires so far. But here's where I want to push back on the data right out of the gate.
Okay, go ahead.
According to the source material, that 3.6 million number is actually an understatement.
Right, because of the mapping issues.
Exactly. The report specifically notes that the mapping in the Northwest is lagging behind the sheer speed of the fire growth. But if the fires are moving so fast that we can't even draw accurate borders around them, why are we deploying 30,000 people into an environment where containment seems mathematically impossible? Are we just throwing resources into a void?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, you have to look at what preparedness level 5 actually dictates in terms of strategy.
Okay.
Level 5 means the national system is essentially tapped out. Nearly all available national resources. I mean, Type 1 and Type 2 incident management teams, hotshot crews, aviation assets, they're all committed.
So everyone is already out in the field?
Yes. So when you have an uncontainable, unmapped fire front, the strategy shifts. Those 30,000 people are not standing shoulder to shoulder trying to build a wall across 100 miles of wilderness. They transition to point protection.
Meaning they stop fighting the fire itself and just start defending what's in its path.
Precisely. They are triaging. Coordinating over 30,000 personnel across dozens of remote environments is an immense, almost unprecedented strain.
I can't even imagine the logistics of that.
It's massive. You are moving armies of people, establishing supply chains for food and water, managing aviation airspace, and maintaining radio communications in steep terrain.
Wow.
So when mapping lags behind fire growth, it is a symptom of a system where the physical reality is simply too dynamic. The incident management teams have to prioritize defending critical infrastructure and human life over drawing a perimeter on a map.
And that physical reality is heavily skewed geographically right now. I think if you stop the average person and ask them, where is the worst wildfire activity in the U.S. right now, the default answer is always California.
Oh, absolutely. It's totally baked into our cultural consciousness.
Right. But reading this report, the epicenter isn't California at all. The entire focus, the dominant story nationally, is the Pacific Northwest. I mean, there are 44 uncontained large fires in the Northwest alone.
The contrast is incredibly stark. The state actually leading the statistics is Oregon.
Oregon is just getting hammered. They have 23 active large incidents, over 1.82 million acres consumed. The report notes this is approaching and by some measures has already exceeded the state's all-time record.
It's a historic level of burning for them.
It is. And then there's the Big Grass Fire in Malheur County. This is the single largest active incident in the entire country right now. It's sitting at 541,079 acres, and it's only 41% contained.
It's massive.
It's like a giant, ever-expanding ink blot over the map, over 500,000 acres. Meanwhile, you look down at California, and they only have 5 active large incidents.
Right, and those 5 incidents in California, the Gann, Ridge, and Buzzard fires, total about 13,600 acres.
Which is practically nothing in comparison.
Yeah, that is a tiny fraction compared to Oregon's 1.8 million. What's fascinating here is the meteorological mechanics driving this geographic shift. Oregon and Washington are experiencing a persistent, breezy westerly flow through the Cascade Gaps.
Right, the report mentions those gaps heavily. But what is physically happening there? Like, why does a gap in a mountain range suddenly turn a breezy day into a catastrophic fire event?
Well, it comes down to fluid dynamics, specifically the Venturi effect. The Cascade Mountain Range acts as a massive physical wall separating the cooler marine air of the Pacific coast from the arid, hotter air of the eastern interior.
Okay.
So when high pressure builds on the coast, that marine air wants to move east toward the lower pressure.
Right.
But it can't go over the mountains, so it forces its way through the narrow river gorges and mountain passes, the gaps.
Oh, so it's like putting your thumb over the end of a garden hose.
Yeah.
Reduce the opening and the water shoots out faster and harder.
Exactly. The air is forced into a smaller volume of space, which compresses it and dramatically accelerates its velocity. Normal atmospheric winds are suddenly channeled and accelerated up to 30 miles per hour.
And they're just blasting continuously into the eastern, drier parts of the states. And you combine that with the fact that there is no significant rain forecast for the next 7 to 10 days across the entire Northwest.
Right. Now, California is absolutely still facing critical conditions and extreme heat. I mean, we're seeing 105 degrees in Redding.
Still really hot.
Very hot. But they haven't had the same alignment of massive continuous fuel beds being subjected to these relentless, topographically accelerated winds.
Yeah.
Oregon has the fuel, the heat, and the continuous mechanical force of those gap winds pushing the fire fronts.
Which brings us to the speed of these fronts. Here's where it gets really interesting.
The speed is terrifying.
It is. The report doesn't just detail the size of these fires, it focuses heavily on their behavior. In Idaho, the MM-115 Highway 20 fire was 300 acres on Saturday. By the time this report was issued, it had exploded to 4,936 acres in a single day.
And it's only 10% contained.
Right. And in Washington, the Little Giant fire is at nearly 915,000 acres, and it's basically running completely free at 2% contained. Then Utah has the Widemouth 2 fire at 115,000 acres.
And when a fire reaches that scale and speed, the standard rules of ground engagement completely break down.
Yeah, the terminology in the report really highlights that breakdown. We're reading about crowning, long-range spotting, and group torching. When I read about how these fires are bypassing containment lines, my first thought wasn't a wildfire.
What did you think of?
It made me think of an airborne virus. You know, you build this massive immune response, the containment lines, the 30,000 personnel, but the pathogen mutates, becomes airborne, and completely bypasses the defenses, popping up miles away.
That pathogen analogy perfectly captures the thermodynamics of what we call a plume-dominated fire. Let's look at the mechanics of why Washington's Little Giant is only 2% contained.
Okay, laid out.
When you have dense, dry fuels and high winds, the fire climbs into the forest canopy. That's crowning. When entire clusters of trees combust simultaneously, you get group torching.
Which has to generate just an unbelievable amount of heat.
It generates an immense amount of localized heat.
Which fundamentally changes the atmosphere above the fire, right?
Yes. The ambient air is heated to extreme temperatures in a matter of seconds. Hot air expands and becomes less dense, so it rises violently. This creates a massive convection column.
Like a giant chimney.
Exactly. We're talking about updrafts so powerful they create their own localized weather systems. This thermal column acts like a massive vacuum, sucking up burning branches, pine cones, and embers, listing them thousands of feet into the air.
And once they are up there, they hit the upper atmospheric winds.
Correct. The upper-level winds catch this burning debris and carry it for miles ahead of the main fire front. When that debris falls out of the column and lands in dry fuel beds, it initiates new fires.
Long-range spotting.
That's long-range spotting. Your pathogen analogy is mechanically sound. The fire is transmitting itself through the air, completely bypassing the physical trenches and bulldozed lines on the ground. You cannot dig a fire line in the sky.
No, you can't.
That is exactly why containment remains at 2%.
And the real danger is what this airborne pathogen is landing on. I mean, it's not just remote timber. The report explicitly highlights that these fires are threatening critical lifelines.
The infrastructure threats are everywhere.
Yeah. In Wyoming, the Bear Fire is threatening energy grids. In Montana, the Skillet Fire is threatening railroad infrastructure. And in New Mexico, the Frijoles Fire, which is burning in steep terrain in the Pecos Wilderness, is threatening communication lines.
It really shatters the illusion of safety.
It does. We have this mental division between the wilderness and civilization, but these fires are chewing through the arteries of multiple states. Now, the reports specifically mention uphill runs threatening these assets. What is the physical mechanism there? Why is a fire more dangerous on a mountain slope than on flat ground?
It comes down to radiative heat transfer. On flat ground, the heat from the fire radiates straight up into the air, and the fuel ahead of the fire has to wait for the actual flames to reach it before it ignites.
Right.
But when a fire is on a steep slope, the flames are physically closer to the uphill fuels.
Oh, because the ground itself is angled up into the heat column.
Exactly. The radiant heat from the fire essentially pre-bakes the timber and brush above it on the mountain. It drives all the moisture out of the vegetation before the fire even arrives.
So it's perfectly primed to burn.
Yes. By the time the actual flame front reaches that preheated fuel, it combusts instantly. A fire can sprint up a steep hillside in minutes, easily taking out a high-voltage transmission line perched on a ridge or a telecommunications tower at the summit.
That's terrifying.
It is. The illusion of the wildland-urban interface is shattered when you realize our energy and supply grids are woven directly through these highly combustible, topographically dangerous landscapes.
So the topography and the physics dictate the behavior. But what dictates the baseline conditions allowing this to happen? I mean, this report spends a significant amount of time detailing the weather.
As it should.
Yeah, we're seeing daytime temperatures of 95 to 102 degrees and relative humidity dropping to between 5 and 15%. But the phrase that kept appearing, the one that triggered NFC advisories in Nevada and central Utah, was poor overnight humidity recovery.
That is a critical metric.
When I read that, it reminded me of a battered boxer in the ring. The bell rings, the round ends, but the referee steps in and says, no, you can't sit down. You don't get a break between rounds.
That's a great way to put it.
The landscape never gets a chance to absorb any moisture before the sun comes right back up and the beating starts again.
The boxer analogy is spot on because it describes the lack of a physiological recovery period, which is exactly what the vegetation is experiencing. In a standard diurnal cycle, temperatures drop at night and relative humidity rises.
And that usually allows firefighters to go on the offensive, right?
It does, but it's important to understand why. It's about vapor pressure deficit, or VPD.
Okay, what is that?
VPD is the difference between how much moisture is in the air and how much moisture the air could hold if it were saturated. During a hot, dry day, the VPD is very high. The air acts like a sponge, forcefully pulling moisture out of the dead fuels on the ground and out of the living plants.
Wow.
Living plants respond by closing their stomata, their microscopic pores, to survive.
So they essentially go into lockdown to hold on to whatever water they have left.
Yes. But when you have poor overnight humidity recovery, the temperature stays high and the humidity stays low through the night. The VPD remains elevated. The air never stops acting like a sponge.
So there's no relief.
None. The plants are locked down, the dead fuels on the ground continue to desiccate, and the environment remains critically receptive to a spark 24 hours a day. The fuel beds are exhausted, just like your boxer, and the fire behavior never moderates.
And if the landscape is critically receptive to a spark, we really have to talk about where those sparks are coming from. The monsoon season is heavily active right now, particularly in Arizona, where the Butte Fire is burning, and in New Mexico.
Yes, the monsoons are definitely playing a huge role.
But the report explicitly details isolated mixed wet and dry thunderstorms. I have to admit, when I read this, it seemed like a massive contradiction. How can a monsoon, a rainstorm, actually exacerbate a fire crisis? Shouldn't a massive influx of rain be the exact thing we need?
This raises an important question, and it points to one of the most dangerous meteorological phenomena in wildland firefighting: the dry microburst.
A dry microburst.
Yeah. In the highly arid environments of the Southwest and the Great Basin, a storm cell can develop high in the atmosphere. It produces lightning and it produces rain. But because the layer of air beneath the storm is so incredibly hot and dry, with that 5 to 15% relative humidity we mentioned, the precipitation physically cannot make it to the ground.
Wait, it just evaporates in midair?
Yes, it's a phenomenon called virga. The rain falls, hits the layer of hot, dry air, and evaporates completely before it touches the fuel bed.
Unbelievable.
So you get hundreds of lightning strikes hitting that desiccated, bone-dry timber we just talked about, instantly initiating dozens of new fires. But the evaporation process creates a secondary, much more immediate threat.
The report mentions thunderstorm outflow winds. Is that related to the virga?
It's directly caused by it. Evaporation is a cooling process. As that rain evaporates on the way down, it drastically cools the air around it. Cold air is denser and heavier than hot air.
Okay, I think I see where this is going.
So you suddenly have this massive column of cold, dense air that plummets out of the sky toward the earth. When it hits the ground, it has nowhere to go but outward. spreading radially in all directions at extreme velocities.
So it acts like a giant atmospheric bellows.
Exactly. Imagine a creeping fire backing slowly down a hill. Suddenly, a thunderstorm miles away collapses. That column of cold air hits the ground, creating a 40 or 50 mile per hour outflow boundary that slams into the existing fire.
And just blasts it with air?
Right. It introduces a massive influx of oxygen and violently pushes the fire front in an entirely new, unpredictable direction. A fire that was behaving predictably can instantly turn and run right toward a community or a fire crew, driven by the outflow of a storm that never dropped a single drop of rain on them.
So what does this all mean? We've looked at the staggering baseline of 3.6 million acres and a massive tapped-out mobilization of 30,000 personnel. We've seen how the epicenter isn't the cultural default of California, but the Pacific Northwest, where the Venturi effect in the Cascade Gaps is turning the landscape into a blast furnace.
It really is a perfect storm.
Yeah. We've unpacked the thermodynamics of how these fires move, creating massive convection columns that spread burning embers like an airborne pathogen, and how botanical stress and the physics of dry microbursts act as the invisible mechanics driving the chaos.
There's so many unseen factors at play.
Exactly. Reading this August 10th report isn't just about absorbing terrifying statistics. It's about recognizing the deep, complex interconnectedness of these systems. The vapor pressure deficit in a Nevada valley dictates the fire behavior, which dictates where a hotshot crew from Florida gets deployed, which in turn dictates the national resource availability for a dry lightning strike in Utah.
And that interconnectedness forces us to evaluate our vulnerabilities on a macro scale. If we connect this all back to the infrastructure threats documented across the report, the energy grids in Wyoming, the railroad lines in Montana, the communication networks in New Mexico, we have to recognize that these are not isolated wilderness events.
They really aren't.
No. They are systemic threats happening simultaneously across the entire western half of the United States, which leaves us with a highly critical puzzle to solve. If localized fires in remote, rugged areas can utilize radiant heat and convection columns to simultaneously threaten the critical energy grids and railroad supply chains of multiple states at once,
how resilient is our national infrastructure to a future where preparedness level 5 becomes the baseline normal rather than the extreme exception?
that is exactly what we need to be asking.
When the battlefield map shows the elements fundamentally bypassing our traditional defenses, we really have to rethink how and where we build those defenses. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the August 10 Wildfire Report. Keep questioning the data, stay curious, and keep seeking the bigger picture.